I always tell people that every time I have you on, you've got to take the biggest victory lap ever because Tony Schaffer was the one who told us, look to the end of July. The end of July is when all of Ukraine is going to blow up. There's going to be counteroffensives. There's going to be all this stuff going on. And nobody in the world was talking about it except for Tony Schaffer. And that's exactly what happened. Not only did we see that breakout by the Russian forces, but it also triggered what? Worries about a collapse in Ukraine and then this huge, monumental, historic swing of diplomatic meetings with President Trump, Vladimir Putin, and the multilateral mini summit at the White House. So kudos to you, Tony, for just nailing that. So, Tony, when you look at things, you saw that at the beginning of the summer, you saw that this would be an inflection point. Where do you see things as it stands now?
Well, to summarize the military situation, it's dire for Ukraine. I don't think people fully understand it. I think President Trump has people around him who are not quite being honest with him regarding how bad it is. The whole Pokrovsk encirclement. Anybody can go. There's a number of outlets which are covering this, and the Russians, while they're not anxious to get it done, they are getting it done, and they're strangling off the last effective forces. Azov Brigade is there deployed. The Azov Brigade is being essentially used as kind of a stopgap to stop the inevitable. It's just coming, and once it happens, it's going to be catastrophic for the Ukrainian military. There's been some leaked documents, which I don't necessarily think are completely accurate, but there are indications that finally the word is out about the enormous losses of Ukraine. And Jack, we've talked about this from the beginning of the war. The Russians have an order of magnitude more people to throw at this, and they don't have to do it all at once, and they're not. So I think that Vladimir Putin, probably had a private conversation with President Trump saying, look, this is all over. We're kind of holding back because, we don't see the need to be, aggressive to the point of where we have to go to the Dnieper, but we're going to continue to move forward. And I think that's the military situation. The diplomatic situation, the Europeans, Jack, continue to drag their feet. You saw Merz, the German chancellor, saying, oh, we want this ceasefire. Nobody's going to go for a ceasefire at this point who understands the situation. And the Russians most certainly will not because they're winning. So I think that's the situation. And the question becomes, will President Trump have the force of will, I'd like to believe, within the next 10 days to get Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky together in a room somewhere where they can sit down and hash out the two issues which remain. What exactly does security guarantees mean? Because that's the big issue. And secondly, what land is going to go where regarding the outcome? And I know there continues to be this reluctance to give up the land the Russians hold, but I just don't see any way out of giving some land to the Russians. So that's the way I see the situation right now.
And it really comes down to it. And I've seen I saw one report earlier this morning saying that Zelensky is at least privately conceding that he likely will have to agree to a frozen conflict along at least the contact line where it is now, which is strikingly similar to those old maps of Novorossiya, the idea of New Russia or Malorussia, like the Little Russia that they would show. You go back to the Russian Civil War. This was very much the same area where the White Army was able to make some of their final stand against the Bolsheviks. So these are cities. These are, and when I say cities, I mean towns, villages, farmlands that have seen war after war after war. So in the Russian Civil War, which of course in this program I've talked about at great length, as well as of course World War II, many of the same area. I mean, when people look at a map, the Battle of Kursk, it happens right there, and then Stalingrad is really not much further to the east of Donbass. And I think people need to remember that Donbass is sort of the door to, it's not Stalingrad anymore, it's Volgograd now, but really the door to the Volga, and then that cuts you right up to Moscow. So this is key strategic land for the Russians, something that they fought for a long, long time, and something that they take very seriously.
Yeah, and to that point, I still see this entire engagement as a form of civil war. I just don't believe we should have been ever involved to the level we are at this point. With that said, if anyone who looks at the Battle of Kursk, the Battle of Stalingrad, once those major engagements were done, once the Russian military had open field, they took it. And I mean fast. So I keep hearing Keith Kellogg and others say, "Well, they've been at war for 3 years and they've not made a lot of gains." They don't have to. The basic philosophy and strategy is attrition. They want to demilitarize Ukraine, which is, and frankly, NATO as well, and that's what they've been doing. And the other thing, Jack, I find interesting is this whole idea of a security guarantee, security force. Many of the European nations are not prepared to do anything. I mean, I think the British Army right now is smaller than the Mississippi National Guard. So I just don't know how the European militaries, who were significant during the Cold War, have been reduced to probably 1/10 of their size during that time, and how how they want to put boots on the ground constantly. Jack, it's insane. And I think one of the things that has to be introduced to the conversation is reality. So much of what I see posturing from the Europeans is based on fiction. And I think President Trump has to be a lot more vigorous. I know he's trying to be polite and diplomatic. And he did call out Mertz, but he's got to be a lot more direct about what President Trump, wants regarding an end state. Because left to the devices of both sides, it's never going to happen. He's got to be the leader. He's got to set up the framework, and he's got to say, this is what has to be done, and go with that. I think that's the only way this is going to be resolved.
In fact, and if you look at that video when they're all sitting there around the table in the multilat, when mayors brought that up about, and we're going to push for a ceasefire, and we need a ceasefire, we need the preconditions for the ceasefire before we move to peace talks, you see Maloney just gives him the eye roll.
Right.
It's just like, what are you talking about here? And then Trump kind of looked at him with the side eye and says, I've done 6, 7 peace deals in wars all around the world, and none of them followed this standard of a ceasefire and then a peace deal. We just went right to the peace deal. And I have to commend the president as well for just having that willingness to say, we're going to cut through all this bureaucratic red tape. It's very, by the way, very old world to have to go through multiple layers of bureaucracy to get to a deal.
Right.
Here, and I think someone at one point in the meeting said, let's try to get the date on the month, a date on the books for a month from now for the next meeting. He goes, a month? No, let's call him right now. And he calls Putin right in the middle of the meeting.
Yeah. Well, see, that's to me, this was a bringing back of the TV show The Apprentice, the European edition, where he's basically
exactly. I love that.
Think about this. I have never seen, and I talked to a lot of reporters about this too, they have never seen every major leader in Europe drop everything and show up in D.C. because of your point. These visits are normally planned out incrementally over like 6 months, and everything is very orchestrated. No, basically, we're going to have a talk. If you want to talk, you show up, you be at the table. Otherwise, we're moving on. And I think, Jack, that's what's got to continue. You can show no fear to the Russians. You can give no deference to the Europeans, because either side's going to bog you down. So you got to continue to go forward. And again, that's why I think it's so important that President Trump personally called for Zelensky and Putin to meet with him somewhere next week, maybe Budapest.